And welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. I'm joined today by our publisher, Ronnie Sanders, and Coach's Corner once again with former Auburn defensive coordinator, Ellis Johnson. Ellis, this is, I know you spent a lot of time in Mississippi during your coaching career. You know, you were a DC at Mississippi State not long before you got to Auburn. So, we were talking about it on the show here a couple weeks ago, but you said you really liked working and living in Starkville. I guess how would you compare those couple of jobs and living and working there?
Yeah, we did. We had it was the first place we lived as a family. All three children were born, and we liked the church, we liked the neighborhood. There were a lot of things that made it a real nice place to live. And we actually got the program turned around after the first couple of years and had it going in the right direction. The last 2 years, were fun in the football arena too. But there are a lot of people make jokes about Stark Vegas and I guess how country it is or whatever. And the only thing that we found is that sometimes you felt like you were a little isolated because it wasn't really close to much. And living in Auburn, you jump on the interstate, you're in Atlanta before you can blink. And it was just a little bit more convenient. We loved Auburn also as a community. But yeah, we had a great time in Starkville and actually ended up having some good days on the football field.
Yeah, I remember when these were a lot smaller then, though. When I was at Auburn, Pete Jenkins, we hired him from Mississippi State, and I said, "Well, what's the difference between, or what's similar, what's the same?" A lot of people say it's the same, and he says, "Well, they're both small." And he said, that, but Starkville was a lot smaller then than it is now. So.
And I felt they were a lot different. I don't know. I mean, Auburn had grown quite a bit by the time I moved there. I'm sure it probably has more. But we didn't really have a mall in Stark Vegas. It was you went to Tupelo, and it wasn't a great mall. It was decent, but if you put Tigertown Mall over in Starkville, it will look like the Chick-fil-A line lined up every day.
Well, talk to us about this week. What should we look for?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I said, talk to us about this week, Auburn and Mississippi State. What do you think we should look for?
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's not an important game, when you look at the conference and of course the standings and all that. But I think it could be critical for both teams to get those 6 wins. And State has just been winning ball games when they do win in unusual ways. They kind of got the quarterback Rogers handcuffed early in the year, and then they got him hurt. They go over and they win a game last week at Arkansas, and kind of unconventionally. They did play good defense, but I don't know. It's kind of a hard team to figure out. Now Auburn, on the other hand, is not a hard team to figure out, but it's obvious Hugh doesn't have his quarterback yet, and everybody's seen his teams. He knows how to coach offense, so obviously they've got some shortcomings in personnel. I think it could be a heck of a game. I do think Auburn's got a little bit better football team, and I think that the biggest thing I've been impressed with the way he has handled this situation. They haven't won a whole bunch of ball games, but they haven't been totally out of any ball game, and I think it's because of the way he's been managing it, the way he's playing to his defense, and not putting the ball in the quarterback's hands too much in critical situations where they get them beat. So having them at home, that's going to be a huge advantage too. So I really think Auburn's got a heck of a lot better shot to win this thing than Mississippi State does, but certainly they can't sleepwalk or they'll get beat.
Yeah, I guess this has the opportunity to be a pretty defensive game. I mean, it might be first one to 14, first one to 17 wins the game. Or were those the kind of matchups you enjoyed as a coordinator when it was just kind of a defensive game?
No, I liked when they were about 50-0 at halftime. I don't know what coach would be honest in telling you that they love coaching one of these 1-point games, that goes the whole way, because every play, when you have a game like that, every play might be the one that breaks your back. And when you've got a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds out there, you know what can happen. And although some of it never does happen, it's in the back of your mind the whole time. But yeah, I obviously looking back on games, like we beat Alabama one time over at State and ran an interception back about 99 yards right before the half, and we ended up winning a real close game. And it's great to look back at them. It's fun to remember them, but when you're involved in them, it's nerve-wracking.
You got me fired when you were at Mississippi State. If you remember.
We got a complex over there. We got everybody fired. We looked up at the end of the season. I think we won like 5 ball games, and 3 people we beat got fired. I said, guys, they don't think very much of us. Every time we beat somebody, they fire the damn coach. We beat Orgeron, they fired Ed. We beat y'all, they fired Zucker. Who was the other one? We had another win, and they fired the coach. We were kind of like, why can't we win? And everybody think we should have won.
Shoot, y'all beat us on Saturday, and Ron walked in on Monday morning, and he says, well, boys, they're pulling the plug.
Well, that one was a little unusual because, we were ugly at that time. Sly actually came in. I don't remember if it was an open date, but he came in after I don't know if it was Maine or who we played right before you guys, but we couldn't get out of our own way. And he said, we've got to simplify. And I said, Coach, we can, but I said, we got to get more speed on the field. Some of these kids think they're great corners. The kid comes to mind is Culberson. And we moved him from corner to outside linebacker, and he had a pick the first series for a touchdown. But we just had some guys there that thought they were better than they were. And we finally just made a wholesale adjustment. So I don't know if it was a factor, but when y'all came into the game, we weren't even in the same defense we'd been in for 3 weeks prior. And, but yeah, it was a crazy game. I don't know if you even paid any attention to it, but we started the game. I think there were like 20,000 people there. And by the time it ended, a bunch of the students must have heard at halftime we had a chance to win. So they came over. I think by the time it was over, it had like 35,000.
Yeah, we had a rough. I think we lost to Ole Miss in Gainesville, and we lost to Ole Miss in Oxford. We were there 3 years, and I think we lost them twice. And then losing to Mississippi State finally put them over the edge, I guess.
Well, Ole Miss had some players at that time. I'm telling you, we couldn't beat them on anybody in state. We'd get 1 or 2 every year, but Ed was doing some powerful recruiting there.
No doubt.
Ellis, when you look at this Mississippi State team, I think a lot of people, maybe a common question when a quarterback is injured, you don't know whether he's going to play, talking about Will Rogers, at least a common question, we hear in the media is to players and coaches, well, how do you prepare for 2 different quarterbacks? As a defensive coordinator, how much stock do you put into that? What does that look like over the course of a week? If, hey, a guy who's a little bit more of a runner, he's available to play, but the other guy, might not be able to go on Saturday. It's
hard, and especially if they're different type players. And I have to confess, I did not see him play last week. I saw very little of it. I think right near the tail end of the game. So I'm not that familiar with the kid. They've already had a situation the whole season where I feel like they haven't used Rogers in the most effective way they can. They haven't been in a good throwing offense. And although you can't just wake up one morning and call a game the same way Mike Leach does, he's very unique. If you watch the plays, they're plays that a lot of other people run, but that's not the thing about it. The thing about it is how he manages the game and how he sets things up and how he teaches his quarterback and how to read through things and get the ball out of his hands, et cetera. And when you don't have him, and he's been doing the whole thing, I don't fault Zach for making a change, but I think they went almost cold turkey. And the kid really can't help him win when he was healthy. So he's just been managing ball games too, from what I've seen. So I don't know how much difference it'll be if they're different physically. That can affect it. It really can. But I don't expect Rogers to play it. If he does, I don't expect him to be full speed. I would prepare for the possibility both of them could play. But I think the biggest thing, is Auburn's got to find a way to move the ball a little bit better, and they've had a hard time. I think that's going to be the key. I think they will do very well on defense against Mississippi State. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not going to get into who has the football last, in some kind of shootout. It's going to be a very close ball game, not a lot of scoring, turnovers will be paramount or some crazy thing in the kicking game. So that I wouldn't be as much concerned about the quarterback at State as I would my own quarterback.
How do you manage two quarterbacks? I'm not sure. I mean, I know when Spurrier used to rotate quarterbacks in and out when he was at Florida, but I'm not sure what he did at South Carolina when you were there. But have you ever experienced that? I mean, rolling one in, rolling the other one out.
Yeah, I mean, I was here with him when it was happening, and it wasn't because we didn't have two kids that were, they couldn't beat each other out. We just had some guys that, when I first got here, Stephen was going through some disciplinary stuff and had not played in the previous spring. And so he wasn't ready to play in the fall. And he was just competing with some guys that couldn't carry his. I mean, they weren't close to him talent-wise. But we ended up starting a player in the first ball game against NC State. He didn't make it past the third series. And they pulled him out, and he never played there again. One of the smelly kids that ended up over to Alabama. He came in and he played okay, but I mean, I think we went through 4 quarterbacks that first year I was here with him. It was more or less just trying to find somebody that could function, and it was obviously a very unusual thing for a guy like Steve Spurrier. And we got through it, and I think we went to the Outback Bowl. But the next year, Stephen was back. He started playing a little bit better, and then we had Connor Shaw behind him. And the year when Connor came in and was competing and challenging him for the job, he did work both of them a little bit. And again, it wasn't that he was trying to do something strategically. He was just trying to find the guy that could manage the game and make plays, on that particular day.
If you're Hugh Freeze and you're trying to marry two offenses, so you've got an offensive coordinator that you really don't know, and you got terminology, and you're trying to marry those two things, and you've been the primary play caller. How do you, and you're mid-season now, and it's a little bit of a mess on offense. What do you do? How do you manage that?
Well, frankly, I think he's managed it pretty well. And I mean, if you just go back, statistically they're not flashy, obviously, but they're not turning the ball over too much, and that's why. Record-wise, they're sitting there right in the bottom of the West with State as far as, I don't think they've got, with Arkansas, but they're playing better football than those other teams are. And that doesn't help you. When you come in that locker room after a game, you still got to hang your psychiatrist sign up and try to pick them up off the floor, because those kids, just like anybody else, they think they can beat anybody on any given Saturday. And so it doesn't matter who you lost to or how well you played through some things. It's no fun. But I do think, I think he's done the best he can do. The biggest thing is we got to get a quarterback in there. And I'm not saying the other guys are not decent players, but they're not going to be able to play in that level, in that league, in the throwing game. They're just not getting any production. I was looking the other day, and the guy had a great percentage of completions, but they didn't let him throw it 17 times. Now, what's that tell you? They're managing him. They're making sure that he can't have 3 plays a game that just break your back. And so, they're in that ball game with Ole Miss. Ole Miss, third best ranked offense in the conference right now. They may be the best offense other than maybe LSU, but statistically they're third best, and they help them down pretty good while they can't effectively, score points. So I think they're doing everything they got to do to try to win ball games, and it's not fun because they're not winning their share. But they get a win this week. I think they're easily 2 more to 3 on the schedule, and they're getting a bowl game, and that's the first step in the right direction. And get about 4 or 5 key players in there and another good recruiting class, and you're back on track. Now you lose this one, or you lose at Arkansas, and you get upset by somebody you shouldn't, then it's hard. And if they don't get to a bowl game, it could be a really a tough climb. But all they got to do this year is get in a bowl game and play well and have a good recruiting class. And I think you're over the hump and you got it going.
How much of a difference does that make? Just getting that first win. If you're in some sort of a losing rut, and I know Auburn's played a bunch of good teams, it's not like they should be ashamed of losing to 3 straight top 15 teams, but you mentioned getting a win on Saturday, especially with the schedule being kind of favorable down the stretch. That's something players talked about a lot yesterday. They said, hey, if we can just get one win, we feel like we can build momentum. How much have you seen that over the course of your career? Did you see that maybe make a difference for a team that was in a bit of a losing streak?
Yeah, it's huge. I think I was just looking for my schedule. They've lost 4 in a row now. And one thing I go back to is that win out of Cal. I mean, hardly anybody saw it. It was at night on the West Coast, and they won a 14-10 ball game. And I thought to myself right then, just seeing what kind of team they were, I said, this is going to be huge in about 2 months. And it may be, because they could have easily lost that ball game, and they didn't. And I think that says a lot about the team, coaching staff, et cetera. Now, you lose 4 ball games in a row. Well, the biggest thing this is going to do is it's going to tell him what kind of locker room he's got. I use that term for, team camaraderie. Are they pulling together? Are they pointing fingers or what? You got some guys don't want to play with a broke finger. You got some guys that don't want to play because their ankle's a little sore, or you got a bunch of guys that are going to fight through. Tell you a lot about your coaching staff and all that. So, I haven't seen any signs of any negativity on all that. And I think it's going to be important, though, soon with 4 losses in a row. And I don't care who they were. I mean, it matters to us because we can look and see with common sense they weren't as good as those teams. But like I said earlier, when you come in that locker room after you get your rear end kicked, it doesn't matter who you lost to. Players are competitors, and it bothers them. And so he's got a tough job. But I do think if they get that first win, the biggest thing I can equate it to when I was at Citadel as a head coach, and they had not won a game the year before. I think the year before that they won 2. So, about anything you did, the kids couldn't challenge you because they had not won a game. So that part wasn't hard. But after about the 3rd week, we came in and we still didn't have a win. We finally beat South Carolina State. And we ended up winning about 3 or 4 games that year just because they finally got some confidence. So I've seen it happen to kids. And, one of those losses was Georgia Tech. Another one was Wyoming. We shouldn't even been able to be on the field with them. But they still hurt after the game. And until we won that ball game against South Carolina State, they weren't totally buying in. So I think it'll help them tremendously. And you back that up, you got Vandy and then Arkansas and New Mexico State. Those are teams that they might be better than right now.
We talked about the talent gap a little bit. How do you mismanage a roster the way that Harsin did the past 2 years? Before, you look at recruiting rankings and you look at all those things, and we've talked some about, we've talked some about it, but it's pretty difficult to, if you look back at, since Dye was hired, it's pretty hard to and look, there are times Auburn can't get out of its own way, but it's pretty hard to screw it up as bad as he did.
Well, I think it was 2 things. Number one, as y'all have said, he wasn't a great fit. And so I don't think immediately everybody jumped on board and got behind him. And then it flips on you. And the other thing is, there was pretty good talent when he came in the door, but it wasn't maybe exactly what he wanted to try to do. And then you lose a guy like Bo Nix, and everybody's thinking, well, he didn't really knock the top out of it, so I don't guess it's a great loss. He goes out in another system, and they're talking about him being in the Heisman voting. So, it's easy to second guess all that kind of stuff. We took over at Alabama in 1990, and we lost the first 3 ball games. But the people in Alabama wanted him there. He was Paul Bryant 2.0 in his reputation, his mannerisms, the way he looked at football, and what they thought he felt about the university. And we weren't playing as well as Bill Curry was, but the fan base had flipped over behind us. And when we go out on the road recruiting, we were having success. And thank God for Vanderbilt. I think we had them the 4th game, and we got it turned around. So if Auburn can't beat State, they can get Vandy next week. They've helped a lot of us get out of the ditch.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to look back that the series is actually tied between Auburn and Vandy. all time. It's 21, 21, and 1 because before like the 60s, Vandy won a ton of games. I think Auburn's won like 15 of the last 17. So in the modern era, it's been no contest. How bizarre is it, Ellis, that next year Auburn's not playing either of the Mississippi schools? It's the first time since 1932 that they're not going to play either of them in the same season. I guess just it's been such a that Mississippi and Alabama are obviously so close by. It's been such a staple for these programs for so long. How bizarre is it that they're not only not Mississippi State, they're not going to play Ole Miss next year either?
That's crazy. It's all this expansion. I remember when we got to Alabama, Coach Spurrier came in, I think Florida the same year in '90. But eventually we were the two best teams in the SEC for a few years, and didn't have much history of playing each other, although they were in the same conference. So there are a lot of things like that. You go back through it historically, but I don't like to see it. I kind of like the whole reason conferences were formed to begin with is because geographically it helped them schedule each other and save money on travel. And, money was a big thing back in the earlier days when they start formulating conferences and stuff. Then they all had ideas, we ought to all be somewhat similar on admissions because we don't need to have, teams playing Harvard playing Valdosta State or whatever. I mean, a lot of the reasons why conferences were formed, it's gone. And the almighty dollar is running the show now, and it has for a little while. And there ain't nothing wrong with money. I mean, you got to have it to have success in a lot of things in life. But when you make it your single focus, there are going to be some other things along the way that are going to suffer. And I think there are a lot of things in college football we're going to live to regret about all this stuff. And I think one thing the fans are already tired of is what you're talking about. They see natural rivals and things like that. They see them just disappearing. And although they may play eventually, they're not going to play regularly. And I mean, people over in South Carolina, certainly South Carolina doesn't have any kind of major history or anything, but playing Georgia has always been a big deal to South Carolina fans. And the series, although it's lopsided, the games have been pretty doggone good. And there are a lot of things like that. I don't think they're going to end up playing Tennessee for like 4 years or something like that. So it's bothering a lot of fan bases in a lot of places, people I talk to. And I just hate to see it. I'm kind of a traditionalist. I mean, I don't even like the playoffs. So y'all know I'm out left field. I just wish they'd left it out and had not had playoffs. I liked it when played the bowls after the rankings, because the bowls were just a good fun trip. But those days are long gone. That bus has left the station.
It's college football's different, obviously, now than it.
Yeah, and not to backtrack too much. When you were talking about how did mismanage a roster, if I was a head coach tomorrow, I might go hire somebody in a major league baseball program to come in and run my football roster. I don't know how they keep a roster together anymore with the portal. Losing kids, gaining kids, and all that. But that doesn't help when you're trying to stabilize a roster when you move in as a new coach. And you got kids, they don't dislike you, but they didn't sign with you. Mm-hmm. And they may play a year, but as soon as they get the first opportunity to go somewhere equal or better, they take off, and you weren't counting on it. So I think that's a factor in managing these rosters too, obviously.
I was talking to a couple of coaches out of Colorado this week, and one of them said, he said it's the same thing. He said it's hard to hold a team together. It's hard to build camaraderie when those guys haven't been in the locker room together. He said the same thing is, he said, they won one game here last year. He said, so I wouldn't do anything differently. He said, we got 60 something new players. And it's hard to hold together. He said, but we're still better than we would have been if we hadn't flipped it.
That's a good point. But I mean, that was something I told somebody very early in the season. The thing that impressed me the most about Colorado is the way they were executing on the football field. And I'm thinking, how the heck do you bring about 50 or 60 of these guys that are playing a lot? They just got there in the spring Some of them didn't get there till the summer, and they looked like they'd been playing together for 2 years. I was very impressed with it. But that's not your locker room always. You can be executing great out on the field, or you can be doing poorly out on the field. And it's not necessarily an indicator of how good your locker room, what kind of shape your team morale, and like you said, the glue that holds them together and all that. Usually when you're winning big, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you'll have some knucklehead go do something stupid and distract the team from a big game. But most of the time, those things kind of magnify when you lose. And so now they've probably got a little bit of it going on out there. And this is where Deion's going to find out what coaching really is.
Well, no doubt. And you were talking a little bit earlier about the rivalries disappearing. I mean, I grew up watching, Oklahoma and Nebraska, and loved watching those kinds of games. I mean, they played every year, and it was fun to watch. I mean, if you look back before the SEC split into divisions, Auburn rarely played LSU. They played once in a while.
Right.
But they played, Auburn played Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. If you remember, played Tennessee early, and then Amen Corner was Florida, Georgia, Alabama at the end of the year. And completely different animal now. Now you've got Georgia earlier in the season, and next year you don't play the Mississippi schools. So I don't believe Auburn plays LSU next year either, do they, Nathan? I mean, so lot different.
That thing the other day, and just kind of curious about South Carolina, and I didn't really study them all that closely. I think it's when I look at it, I was thinking, man, if I was a coach, I'd be so excited. Some of these teams, they're going to get to play every year. But then all of a sudden, when you look at it from the fan standpoint, I mean, I grew up in South Carolina, but I'm not a big-time South Carolina Gamecock fan who's been donating to the scholarship club for 30 years. These people, and it's that way at every school. They really care about things like that. And they got buddies and old, people they've known or worked with on the other side. And it's it's a big deal. And I think what you're going to see overall, you're going to see less people at the stadiums and more people, if they're learning how to stream like I did 2 weeks ago, they're going to start watching on the tube, man. And they're just not going to go to the stadium to watch some of these teams play. I think it's going to affect Big Ten. I think some of these West Coast teams come over to play, or the East Coast team go over to play. I don't think you're going to have anybody travel. And I don't think you're going to have a whole lot of home team people go.
I tend to agree, especially, I think the SEC is a little bit different because Texas and Oklahoma, they at least kind of fit the profile. But, I mean, if you're talking about who's going to go watch Washington play Rutgers? I mean,
right. And the ACC's already have that issue. I mean, nobody's going down from Boston to watch Miami, and nobody's going from rabid Miami go up to Boston.
Right.
They're just not going to do it unless it's just one special trip that they've never seen the place before. But you're not going to get fans. I know we've had games here at Carolina, and these damn people show up from LSU, and it'd be about if we could get 15,000 of them in there, there were probably 40,000 in Columbia, and they're out at the buses and wherever else they can. But they're going to be around it, and they're going to, they're going to the games even if they can't get a ticket to get in the stadium. I don't think you're going to see that in other conferences that much.
I agree with you, and I think and I haven't been up to Missouri. I probably need to go. I think I've been everywhere else in the conference except there. But just talking to people, it doesn't seem like that. The culture really fits there. That doesn't seem like it's the same as it is at A&M or Texas or Oklahoma and some of the other SEC schools.
It is a little different. And the first time I went out there, I was with Clemson. It was just a non-conference game. And they had a good quarterback. I think his dad was a coach. And they beat us. And we had a decent team that year. So they've always played good football. They've got some big-time history. Go back to the Big Eight. And they win the Orange Bowl many years, representing the Big Eight. Not like Oklahoma, but I think they don't have that atmosphere, but it's SEC football, and it's an SEC attitude. I don't know how well they travel. I've never really paid much attention to it. And then, of course, we've been back out there probably between the the different teams I've coached on in the SEC. And then, of course, we had to play them to win the SEC that 2013, when we were at Auburn. And they had a heck of a football team. But and I think Eli's got a heck of a team out there this year. But it's a little different. They don't have 100,000 people there, and they don't have quite the, the number of people out there in those buses and everything else that, just flood the place.
Yeah, I think Eli's probably done better job than most putting the money where his mouth is, or I guess in reverse, because he got that extension when they were, about a 500 program under him, and now they're having his best season there at Missouri. And so, I mean, Auburn goes there next year. Ronnie, maybe you'll make the trip then.
I think the thing there, Nathan, I think you made a good point, is, the AD believed in him and gave him time. And I think, sometimes having a little bit of patience and allowing guys to work through things, patience at this particular point in time in college football, any kind of football, is not real popular. But sometimes giving a guy a chance to kind of build a program, get his feet under him, especially somebody who hasn't been a head coach before, and really believe it in him and giving him a chance pays off. And it looks like it's paid off for Missouri.
Absolutely. The things that jump out at me is his quarterback development, and they look better up front. Because I'm going to tell you now, those 2 years went back-to-back, played in the SEC championship game, their defensive front could play with anybody. They were destructive, and they had some players that could play anywhere in that league. And then it kind of went a little bit down, in my opinion. And they weren't as good up front on either side of the ball. But they've had some players out there that could make big-time SEC plays anytime. I think Eli, if I were an AD, I'd try to evaluate recruiting and the discipline, and then see what the games look like as far as, are they making terrible decisions, or are the kids not, they're not focused, and you can tell those things usually. And I think when you see those things, just what you said, patience will pay off. And it does come a time, though, in this microwave situation we're in with all this portal stuff, you can't take 5 years to turn it. You got to get something flipped within 2 seasons, whether it's a great recruiting class or something, that you can see, hey, we found what we got to build on and we can get this thing going. You got to have some kind of a sign, because if not, it just starts to snowball back the other way.
I think that's a lot of what happened with Harsin. I mean, he came in and, the recruiting wasn't great. He didn't do a great job with the boosters, and then the product on the field continued to deteriorate. And before you know it, it had gotten away from him. So,
I mean, obviously hindsight, but I mean, with Bo Nix leaving, it was a bad situation, not just from losing a potential good player, but Dad had played there, he played there. It's an Auburn family. Why the hell is he leaving? Mm-hmm. Something. There's got to be something other than they don't run the right pass routes, and I don't like it. It's not normal to lose a kid like that. I know North Carolina, the May kid. They said they were hitting on him all through the off season, and one or two literally tried to buy him to get him to leave North Carolina, because kind of down a little bit. He weren't playing that well, and he's a North Carolina family. He's got an uncle and a dad, and I think a cousin. They've all played major sports there in the last several years, and he wasn't leaving North Carolina. And that's when I saw him leave, I thought that's a little bit unusual. I didn't, it just didn't seem right to me.
Well, and I think we all know Allen Green went rogue and hired Harsin without the approval of a lot of people that really mattered. And when with a new president, new athletic director, Auburn's in a much better position now than it was 2 years ago. But on the football field, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a little bit of patience.
Yeah, and you talked about Ellis, some sort of turning point you have to have early on. I think Freeze hopes that it'll be recruiting. I mean, they jumped ahead in the 2025 class. They've got the number 4 class in the country right now, which that's not, there's not a lot of volume to that, but Christian and Jason, seem to think they can get a top 10 class in 2024. But you mentioned Bo Nix. It's interesting to look back at how things spiraled the last time Mississippi State came here. Auburn blew a 25-point lead in that game. Bo Nix breaks his ankle and is out. If you look at that was pretty much the beginning of the end. And that was pretty much everything that's happened since then has sort of crippled the program. I think they're 2-13 in the SEC since then. They have 3 Power 5 wins since then. You're like you said, your Heisman quarterback, who's now doing that somewhere else, left the program. And so it's crazy to see everything that's happened since that game. So maybe now that Mississippi State comes back to their building, maybe they can turn it the other way with a win on Saturday and start to have things looking up a little bit.
Yeah, I think getting to a bowl game, I'm not going to say it's absolutely necessary, but it will be a huge, huge plus because, as many bowl games as there are these days, if you don't go to one, somebody you're recruiting is hearing that in their ear constantly when you're not talking to them. The other people are using it on you, and that just is something that's kind of a little measuring stick. Oh, you think they've got it turned? Well, they didn't even get in a bowl game, and so other recruiters are going to be using that. And then the other thing, which of course I'm not, I don't have any experience with it, but I think using the portal is absolutely critical too. I mean, you don't have to go get 30 players, but getting 3 or 4 key players through the portal, I think is very important also.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yesterday, I maybe didn't expect a couple veteran Auburn players on defense talking about how important it is to get to a bowl game, like how badly they want to go to a bowl game. And sometimes I think there's a stigma that players don't necessarily care about it, but both of them said, look, we haven't won a bowl game since I've been at Auburn. So we want to go to one and we want to win one. And so, I think
they all know it's a great experience. Any bowl game's a fun experience, but any kid doesn't want, the only ones that wouldn't want to go, and I used to worry about this or think it was bad, but when you got one that's almost definitely going to get drafted, he's in his last year, they don't want to play in a bowl game. It's not going to have any implications for the ranking of the team or championship or something. You almost understand that because it's like all the other things we're talking about. The money in pro football now, if that kid jeopardizes that, I mean, it's like jeopardizing your degree, your medical degree or something. You just have to make some decisions. It may not be appealing to a lot of people, but it's just common sense. You got to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll see about that this year if Auburn goes. It was their All-American safety was one of the guys saying yesterday that he really wants to go. So that doesn't sound like he wants to opt out if they end up going. But obviously they've got to get back on track this weekend. We'll see if they're able to do that against Mississippi State. Ellis, thank you so much for being here as always. Thank you to everybody for listening to the show today. Go out, leave us a 5-star review. That's the number one thing that helps us. We'll catch you guys later in the week. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day.